We have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough. And it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we are dealing in hate. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy.
I believe that we have not only romanticized the protests that followed the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, and Sean Reed, but that we've done so to our detriment because we've been encouraged to by government and media that wants us to believe that we've suffered unprecedented attack and setback to a movement we keep being fooled into believing both began and reached its highest peak in the summer of 2020. A question I'm asked religiously is what happened? So many people are convinced that in 2020, we were united in a demand for change. And because they believe that falsehood, they feel gutted because police budgets continue to increase, copaganda rages on, and relentless attacks on progressive reforms and political candidates persist. And they impute their feelings of defeat to the movement. However you want to characterize the different or combined efforts to fight police brutality, mass incarceration, racism, and systemic oppression, it did not begin in 2020. No movement began in 2020. Whether it be abolition, Black Lives Matter, none of it began in 2020. And what happened to George Floyd was a tragedy. But in America, it was not and is not an anomaly. We've seen what happened to George Floyd happen before. It happened to Eric Garner. But George Floyd's death led to so many protests, Black Lives Matter became arguably the largest civil rights movement in American history. And it's true that in the summer of 2020, after Americans who'd been locked in their homes for months watched police choke George Floyd to death, people protested in over 500 places across the country each and every single day. But what were we united in? What were people protesting and why? I believe that just as much as people had felt compelled to leave their homes in the name of people who'd been wrongfully killed, it's also the only reason people who had been involuntarily locked in their homes for months in the name of saving their neighbors' lives could justify leaving their homes and being surrounded by people at the risk of catching and spreading a virus. And I think that played a role in people's willingness to go out and protest that American ego won't allow us to admit. In fear, it'll stain our altruism. That doesn't mean that people weren't genuinely horrified at Derek Chauvin's actions. In fact, that's exactly what they were protesting, a specific instance of police brutality where they wanted criminal charges brought against an officer. But few argued that the officer shouldn't have been called. Many lamented about how the officers could have arrested him without killing him. Few argued that he shouldn't have been arrested at all. Many questioned what kind of civil society doesn't charge the officer who murdered George Floyd, but less questioned the need to police him in the first place. Many people have chanted along with us when we said, the system isn't broken, it's working as intended. But they didn't and don't truly understand what that means in application. They don't understand how the different parts of the system function to make what happened to George Floyd possible. And thus, they don't really know what policies, candidates, and initiatives they should be supporting where criminal justice and Black liberation is concerned. The failure to consider over-policing explicitly as a cause of George Floyd's death is why we never truly were united in the same vision for changing or dismantling the system, or even preventing what happened to George Floyd from happening again. Which is why I want to illustrate what it means to be criminalized, how over-policing Black and brown communities makes way for tragedy every day. I live in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Little Caribbean to be specific. Dubbed that because it's precisely what it is. Every establishment has a different Caribbean flag on the banner. You will likely hear some form of reggae or soca music playing in the street at some point in time, and most of the people walking by, yours truly, are probably more than willing to tell you what Caribbean flag they've got hanging at their home. I've got a Bahamian flag at mine. I often joke to my friends that I've never been around this many Caribbean people in my life, and I was born and raised in the Caribbean. I love this incredibly Black neighborhood and the people in it. I take daily aimless 5-mile walks. I walk around at all hours of the night and chop it up with so many people and their pets that I've come to know I do that because I can. It's a great and safe neighborhood. But you likely wouldn't realize how great of a neighborhood it is if you were judging by the visible police presence on every corner, where they stand in clusters, with their back to the stores they've been tasked to protect, looking through us, stone-faced like London soldiers. They delight in harassing the black school kids getting off the subway and playing on the basketball courts after school. They take the joy out of communal interactions and criminalize them. And that's precisely what they did to John Guerra. Guerra's story went viral on Twitter recently because people were outraged to see video footage of NYPD shove him as he held his 20-month-old son in his arms. The discourse largely revolved around condemning the police brutality, but the events leading up to and following the brutality are both worse and what I believe we should really be talking about. On April 24th, right here in Flatbush on Woodruff Avenue, John Guerra was outside with a group of other adults and their children, as is common in the neighborhood. The adults were playing Baby Shark on the stereo for the children to enjoy, and someone called the police and made a noise complaint. That's how a group of parents and their children's ordinary interactions become criminalized. That's how these things always begin. 3 NYPD officers then arrived and began arguing with the woman playing the music on her stereo and demanding she give her stereo to them. When she wouldn't give it to them, the officers began aggressively trying to arrest her. So Guerra stepped in and told the officers they were doing too much. The price for asking grown men to stop using force on a woman who had been playing Baby Shark on the radio for the children was that 5 officers pushed Guerra and his son, who was in his arms, into a metal grate before kicking him, arresting him, and slapping him with criminal charges when no criminal action was committed on his part. They then made the choice to take his son, who could have been left there with friends and neighbors, in a separate police car from his father, all the way to the 70th precinct, where they held that crying child for more than 10 hours. Then they chose to turn the child over to ACS, which initiated a custody battle between Guerra and the child's mother, who lives in Texas. Because Guerra could not attend the custody hearing in Texas due to the criminal case, the mother was granted full custody and he was stripped entirely of visitation rights. When this story hit Twitter, people focused on the brutality of the police hitting a man who was holding a child. The Gothamist article that broke the story was titled, "Video of NYPD Officer Pushing Father with a Toddler Raises Questions About Police Use of Force When a Child is in Harm's Way." But the core of this story is and should be that a man and his son were listening to Baby Shark with their neighbors, and one call to NYPD destroyed their family, and it happens every single day across this country, and you do not hear the stories. And even when you do hear the stories, it doesn't change what's happened. Just like you now know what John Guerra is going through at this exact moment. You know it's unjust, and it doesn't matter that the criminal case will likely go nowhere. He no longer has custody of his child or the ability to see him. That is what we mean when we say we are criminalized and over-policed. That's what we mean when we say the police destroy families and terrorize our communities. And that's important. Because just like the American government avoids addressing the root causes of crime because that wouldn't fuel mass incarceration, so too does American media avoid the heart of the problem. Because being solution-oriented doesn't feed news cycles, which is why we often get coverage that focuses on criticizing police brutality, but not the over-policing that facilitates it. I think it's time to start getting to the heart of the problem. Over-policing Black and Brown communities is what leads to police brutality. It's what ends lives. It's what destroys families. We can't talk about police brutality without discussing the role over-policing plays. It doesn't mean anything that you protested the police who killed George Floyd if you too would have made the 911 call that put the police on his neck. Have y'all ever heard of raccoon dogs? Like it's a raccoon, but it's not, because it's a dog, but it's not, because it's a raccoon dog. Nigga. They live in Southeastern Asia and Europe. They growl and bark and do dog stuff, but they look like raccoons. And by the way, raccoons are very persecuted, but we will talk about that on another day.